Well, it all started in 1933 when Hitler came to power. But at the beginning, there was no change in our life, and we all thought it will go away. And we lived in a small city of about 20,000 people. We had a grain business and a flour mill, and everybody knew everybody in a little town for generations, I would say. So we didn't know, there was no difference between us and them. I had my business, our grain business, till 1938, but it was very hard because they came with new laws every other month. They had new laws, you can deal in this and you can't deal in this, and then they got after the farmers and told them, you better break up your business with the Jew. That's what they said. And they got scared. And they said, Bernard, we know you, we knew your father, and we just can't do it because we are in danger if we continue to make business with you. So at this time, I had already in mind to close up the shop. But the Crystal Night really started this whole deal. They destroyed all the synagogues, most of them, I would say, and they busted the apartments in the houses where Jewish people lived and threw the stuff out on the street. Aunt of mine, they dumped the refrigerators and everything from the third floor down to the street. They had knives in their hand and cut every picture on the wall to pieces. They acted like animals and not like human beings. One day before the Crystal Night, my brother-in-law died a natural death in a very small town in the province of Pomerania, and there was no way that we could bury him there because all the people in this little town were afraid to help Jews and do something for Jewish people. So what we did is we lived in a small city in close to Berlin, 60 miles east of Berlin, and my nephew and I decided, my nephew at this time was in Berlin, and we decided to get him buried in my hometown. And so we went by car 160 miles to his hometown, and I had ordered the undertaker from my hometown, which I knew very well for years, and he said I would do it for you. But unfortunately, the same night, which was the Crystal Night, we got, the SS came in the morning by 5 o'clock, knocked at the doors, and took me and my nephew to the jail, city jail. We didn't know what's going on and why they did it. And after about one day, we all boarded buses and went to little towns in the area where they picked up more Jewish people, and then they took us to the concentration camp Sachsenhausen, close to Berlin. Well, since I was very friendly with this undertaker, he still went to this little town and transported my dead brother-in-law to my hometown, and they buried him in a night without anybody there, because they were afraid to help Jewish people. Well, I stayed in the concentration camp 2 months, And my folks from my hometown were lucky to get out after 3 and 4 weeks. But it took for me 2 months because I was not taken in my hometown. I was out of the district, and that took them, paperwork and all that took them 2 months before I got out. And I got out only because my mother and my folks in my hometown could prove that we will leave Germany in 1 or 2 months. They bought tickets to Shanghai. This was the only place in the world where you could go without any visa. All you needed was a passport with a J in it. The authorities stamped your passport with a big J, which means Jew.
Can you tell us what life was like for you in Sachsenhausen when you were taken there?
Well, at this time, I have to say, they didn't kill any people like in gas chambers. They didn't have this at the time. They beat some Jewish people, and I knew some, to death. That happened once in a while, but not execution like they did later on. And we all hope that we will get out.
Was this a work camp?
Oh, yeah. Oh, hard work. We had to carry cement bags. We had to unload ferry boats on a river with cement bags, and they threw it on our back, and people collapsed and died on the spot. Oh, yeah, that wasn't easy. They told us at the beginning, I have to mention that when we got in, you never will get out alive here. Don't figure that you ever get out alive. That was what they told us the first night. We had to stand 48 hours after the bus trip outside on a big compound, on camp compound, before they had everything organized to get us into the barracks. Now, I have to say that at this time, they mostly took the men and not women. So there was no family like in later years. Here and there, someone escaped. If he got caught, he was dead. But it was almost impossible. They had fences with electric fences. They had guards. They had dogs all over. There was no way. There was no way to get out. Besides, everybody knew if he gets caught, he's out. He's dead. So at this time, we all had the hope we will get out somehow. As we get in the camp, we had to strip completely and got a suit with stripes, garment, you know what it was. And they cut the hair completely off, so you looked like a monkey and not like a human being. And the food, you could live from it, but it was not too good, I would say. Some guards didn't like certain persons, and that was bad. If this happened, he was almost dead. They beat him to death sooner or later. And at the workplace, we had to, the labor, when we had to go out every morning, you had to march out and to sing. You had to sing. For them, music was everything. They had a band in a concentration camp too, and you had to sing songs and walk out, and then you got your pick, your shovel and everything, and had to work all day long. And if you stopped working, the guard was standing right close. He came with his dog and choop, you got something and knocked him down, you know. It was bad. I don't like to remember all that. But I survived.
How did you get out of the camp?
I got out of the camp only because my folks got the tickets to Shanghai on a ship and proved it. They had to prove that we leave Germany in 2 months after my release.
So did your parents come to get you from the camp, or did you leave the camp and go to their
Oh no!
to go to them?
They
and
called us this morning and said, "You go home. You are released." But it took hours and hours before they gave us the papers, and they gave us the money to go on the train and go back home. And everybody looked at us in the train because we had no hair, you know. And they knew right away, hey, these are Jews. They're coming from the concentration camp. That was terrible. I still remember I was sitting in the train and everybody was looking at me because they knew that's a Jew. He comes from Sachsenhausen. And
so how long was it before your family left for Shanghai?
About 2 months. See, we had to sell the real estate, the property, and pack up everything. And we left. I got out of the concentration camp in January the 10th, 1939, and we left about 2 months later for Shanghai.
And what was life like for you for those 2 months? How could you live?
The first 4 weeks we stayed in my hometown because we still had the house, and we sold all the furniture and everything out. And then we went the last 4 weeks to Berlin, which was 60 miles away from us. And there we lived in a rented apartment for 4 weeks till the time came to leave for Shanghai. And we packed there's something else I have to mention, a big, what you call now the containers, you know, the big containers, but at this time they had them only made from wood. And we put in all the stuff we could take, furniture which we liked, special things, and we took this with us to Shanghai. But unfortunately, before the freighter with our container got into Shanghai, the war broke out, and they took them to a friendly port, to Japan, instead to China. Japan was friendly with Germany, so they took our container to Japan and notified us in Shanghai, you have to pay for the freight from Japan to Shanghai. And this is where our last money went, $100, I remember at this time was a lot of money, to get our container with furniture and stuff to China. We were 12 members of the entire family, and my mother and my sister bought tickets for all of them to Shanghai. First class, because there was nothing else available. So they had to take first class. And one niece of mine had a boyfriend in Berlin and wouldn't leave. He told her, we're going to South America pretty soon. And they never made it out, and when she got the deportation order, she committed suicide. That's what we heard after the war. Otherwise, all 11 went to Shanghai. Now, Shanghai was international at this time, had an international settlement, French and British and American. We could not afford to live there because it was too expensive. So I would say 90% of the refugees which came from Europe had to live in a district which they had a war there before we came, and everything was destroyed, houses were burned up, and this is the area where we had to live, because otherwise we couldn't afford it, to live in this international settlement. We all lived in row houses, I would say, which were owned by Chinese people. But everybody had only one room, that was all. We all lived in one room. My mother and I and my wife, we all lived in one room. And when the container came, we didn't know what to do with it. We had no room to put the stuff in. And it had to disappear from, they dumped this big container in front of the house, apartment house, and it had to disappear in a few days. You could leave it there. So we stuffed this one room full of what we want to keep, and then we started to sell, and the Chinese people were very eager to buy European stuff. Furniture, crystal, you name it. They were very eager to buy Europe. That was a lucky deal. So we sold most of the stuff, and we needed money anyway because we got out with $10 out of Germany. So I saw a business in that, and the first thing I did, I got Chinese. They came along, they walked the street, and I said, would you buy this container? And they were very eager to buy it because they needed wood. So I started to sell those empty containers to Chinese. And then it dawned on me, maybe I could sell other stuff to the Chinese, and I got into business. After I was 2 months in Shanghai, I heard that there is a Shanghai Volunteer Corps which is patrolling the international settlement. And when I approached an officer there, he said, you are a refugee, why don't you join the Jewish company? They had a Jewish company in the inside the Shanghai Volunteer Corps. So I joined the Jewish company, which were mostly Russian Jews, which were in Shanghai from 1917-18 after the revolution in Russia. They had to get out of Russia like we had to get out of Germany. And they went all to China and Shanghai mostly and opened up big businesses, export, import, and all that stuff. And I joined this company, and I got the British uniform, and they trained us, and I never in my life will forget. 2 months ago, I was in a concentration camp under guards close by, and 2 months later, I was on a shooting range in Shanghai training for the Shanghai Volunteer Corps. This is something I never, ever will forget. And we had good lives there. We had, first of all, good food, which was very important. And there was they didn't pay us for it, but they gave us food, and we went home in the evening, and they called us whenever there was something going on. We had to be there. But then, when the Japanese came, we had to dissolve this whole volunteer corps immediately and get rid of uniforms and everything, because the Japanese would go against us. So I destroyed everything, every proof that I was ever, and they destroyed the membership list too. As the Japanese came in 1943, by that time they had learned from the Germans that we are the enemies of the Germans, and they told them, these are Jews and we throw them out. So they had, the first thing the Japanese did, they put us in a so-called ghetto. That means we could stay in, some people lived already in that area, and the others which lived outside that area had to move in. And nobody could leave the ghetto without a special passport, a special permission from a Japanese high command. So you had to go there and get your permission. You had to tell this officer. He was very tough and very rough. He beat Jewish people when they came there. So you had to prove that you have a reason to get out of the ghetto in order to make a living. So my partner got this little permission passport, they call it, and he could go out and in order to sell the stuff in the French and international settlement. Otherwise, we couldn't have made any business. Luckily, he could prove this, and they gave him the permission to go out and in. You had to show your passport when you walk out, and when you came back, they had Jewish guards there on the entrance to the ghetto. But it was not a ghetto in the way like in Poland. We had restaurants there, and the Jewish people started to open up stores, bakery stores, butcher shops, little clothing stores, restaurants, everything. In fact, we went dancing on weekends on a roof garden. There was a movie with a roof garden. So it wasn't too bad, even under Japanese occupation. Shanghai got bombed during the war, and unfortunately they hit close to our ghetto a radio station. They were after a radio station to destroy, and we had quite many losses in our community from the bombing in Shanghai. And then when the Americans came, and the war was over, I got a job for about 2 years with the American Army as civilian employee, because the American GIs and officers were not allowed to drive in Shanghai because the speed limit was 15 miles. It was a speed limit because everything is on the street. The bicycles, the people, they walk not on the sidewalks. On the sidewalks they cook their meals. They walk in the street, and everything is on the street, rickshaws and all that, and too many accidents happened because the Americans were used to drive faster. So they said, this is it. No American soldier or officer is allowed to drive. We hire private people. And they hired a lot from our refugees, and I took a job and was a jeep driver for a year and a half. I did this till my papers were ready for the United States. We were listed, before we went to Shanghai, we were listed already for the USA. But since there is a quota system, as you might know what that means, certain quotas, they took us to take 2 years, 3 years before your quota is there. So after the war, we went to they opened up the American consulate again in Shanghai, which was closed during the war. And we went to the American consulate and showed them the papers that we applied for the United States in Germany, and they took this up for us, and it took about another 6 months before we got ready to leave for the United States. But we had bad luck again. My mother and my sister and brother-in-law, they all belonged to the Polish quota, if you know what that means. The Germans had a German quota. I was German quota, but my mother and sisters and so on, they all belonged to the Polish quota, because when they were born in that area, it was under Polish government. You have to know, in Europe it changed. Several years this was Polish, then it was German, then it was Polish again. It's not like here in the United States. So unfortunately, they fell under the Polish quota, and that was impossible to wait. There were hundreds of thousands of people waiting. So what we had to do is I had to go to the United States on my quota, on the German quota, and they had to wait in Shanghai. But then the communists came to Shanghai, and they had to flee again from there. And they promised him to bring him to Italy, a whole shipload of refugees with Polish quota and other quota than American. German quarter, they took him to Italy and told him, we put you in a camp in Italy and you wait your quota and then you go to the United States. The ship never stopped in Italy and took him right to Israel. And they stayed in Israel and were very happy there. My mother died there. I visited her several times in Israel. And this was a good solution of this deal.
So who went to the United States with you?
My wife, I married in Shanghai. And my son was born in Shanghai. He was 15 months old when we left Shanghai. I went with my wife and my son to the United States, and we came to San Francisco. We all were registered, and when I visited the authorities there, the Jewish committee, they said, give us your profession. What are you? So I said we had a grain business and a flour mill. They said, oh, this way you have 3 choices in the United States: Kansas City, Minneapolis, or Chicago. Well, Chicago was well known in Europe as a gangster town at this time. So I said, I'm not going to Chicago, and I'm a small town boy, and I don't like big cities anyway. Then I pointed to Minneapolis, and they said, you know, it's a cold place. I said, no, I don't want that either. So Kansas City was the only choice, and I made the right choice. That was the right choice to do.